In the stone beneath cities, something older than names still breathes. Beneath the asphalt and the steel, beneath the foundations and the forgotten cellars, the planet keeps its ledger in layers of compressed time. Each stratum a sentence, each fossil a whisper of what came before. And if the earth remembers everything, every footprint, every fire, every first word spoken into dawn, then perhaps we are not the first to ask whether we have walked this way before. The question arrives like morning light through ancient dust. Long before the pyramids rose from sand, before the first alphabet carved itself into clay, before the wheel turned or fire was named, the world was already old beyond measure. Mountains had been born and worn to nothing. Oceans had opened and closed like slow breaths. Rivers had carved canyons and filled them again with sediment. And in that vastness of geological time, in those billions of years when stone flowed like water and continents drifted across the face of the deep, what stories might have been written and then erased? What civilizations might have bloomed in the spaces between ice ages, leaving only the faintest trace, a layer of ash, a pattern in sediment, a question that will not rest? We stand at the edge of knowable time, looking backward into a darkness that predates memory itself. And in that darkness, the possibility shimmers that this moment, this breath, this exact arrangement of consciousness and curiosity might be an echo of something that happened before, not in myth, not in metaphor, but in the patient, unforgiving archive of stone. The horizon glows with questions older than answers. The wind carries dust from mountains that witnessed ages we can barely imagine. And somewhere in the turning of seasons, in the patient accumulation of sediment, and the slow dance of tectonic plates, the earth holds secrets it may never fully reveal. The earth turns. It has always turned. And somewhere in its turning, perhaps, we have returned. The geological record speaks in a language older than words. Rocks tell time in layers, sedimentary pages stacked one upon another, each preserving a moment of ancient weather, ancient seas, ancient air. Most geologists agree that the Earth's crust holds roughly 4.5 billion years of history, though only fragments survive. Erosion writes its own story over the original text, weathering away evidence, scattering clues across tectonic boundaries and subduction zones where the planet swallows its own past. In this deep time, humanity appears as barely a flicker. Homo sapiens emerged roughly 300,000 years ago, a mere fraction of a percent in the planet's autobiography. Our species has existed for such a brief moment that if Earth's history were compressed into a single year, humans would appear only in the final minutes before midnight on December 31st. Yet even within that sliver of time, civilizations have risen and vanished with startling regularity. Cities that once held tens of thousands now lie buried beneath jungle canopy or desert sand. Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey, dated to around 9600 BCE, predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years and the pyramids by 7,000. Its massive stone pillars, carved with intricate symbols and animal figures, emerged from a time when conventional archaeology insisted humans were simple hunter-gatherers, incapable of monumental architecture or organized religion. Evidence suggests that complex societies appeared, flourished, and disappeared throughout the Holocene, the current geological epoch that began roughly 12,000 years ago after the last major ice age. But the Holocene itself is merely the most recent chapter in a much longer story. Before it came the Pleistocene, spanning from about 2.6 million years ago to 11,700 years ago, an era of advancing and retreating ice sheets that covered much of the northern hemisphere in glaciers miles thick. During this time, ice advanced and retreated in cycles lasting tens of thousands of years, each cycle reshaping the face of the planet. During glacial maximums, sea levels dropped by as much as 400 feet. Coastlines extended far beyond their current boundaries. What are now shallow seas and continental shelves were then dry land, vast territories where ancient peoples could have lived, built, and thrived. The exposed land masses connected regions now separated by ocean. Indonesia and Malaysia formed a single continent called Sundaland, roughly the size of modern Europe. Britain was attached to continental Europe by a land bridge that stretched for hundreds of miles. Alaska and Siberia shared Beringia, a bridge of earth and grass where mammoths roamed and humans migrated. When the ice melted, the oceans rose, slowly at first, then catastrophically in pulses. Entire landscapes vanished beneath the waves. Rivers became fjords. Valleys became straits. Coastal plains that may have supported tens of thousands of people disappeared underwater. If civilizations existed on those coastal plains, their remains now rest under hundreds of feet of seawater and sediment, largely inaccessible to conventional archaeology. The Persian Gulf, now a shallow sea, was once a river valley that may have supported settlements for thousands of years before flooding. The Black Sea, some researchers propose, was a freshwater lake until roughly 7,500 years ago, when rising Mediterranean waters breached natural barriers and flooded it within decades or centuries. An event that may have inspired flood myths in surrounding cultures. Scientists believe that several episodes of rapid sea level rise occurred at the end of the Pleistocene. Meltwater Pulse 1A, roughly 14,600 years ago, raised oceans by perhaps 50 feet in just a few centuries, a rate of change that would be catastrophic for coastal populations. Another pulse, around 8,200 years ago, released enormous volumes of fresh water from glacial lakes in North America, disrupting ocean currents and climate patterns worldwide. These were not gentle transitions. They were planetary convulsions that would have reshaped coastlines, displaced populations, and erased entire worlds from the accessible record. The archaeological horizon grows hazy beyond 10,000 years. Organic materials decay, wood rots, fabric disintegrates, leather and parchment dissolve. Even stone structures, given enough time and weathering, crumble into ambiguous formations that could be natural or artificial. Sites that might hold evidence of older civilizations often lie beneath meters of sediment, underwater, or in regions too remote or politically unstable for systematic excavation. Some researchers propose that human history might contain forgotten chapters, periods of cultural sophistication that predate our current historical narratives. These proposals remain contentious, primarily because physical evidence is scarce and often ambiguous. But absence of evidence in archaeology is not always evidence of absence. It may simply mean that time, erosion, and rising seas have claimed what once existed, leaving only tantalizing hints in flood myths, enigmatic structures, and anomalous artifacts that refuse to fit neatly into established timelines. The planet's memory is imperfect, fragmented, overwritten by its own restless dynamism. Continents collide and separate over hundreds of millions of years. Volcanic eruptions bury landscapes under ash and lava, preserving some things while destroying others. Rivers change course, carrying away what once stood on their banks. Deserts expand and contract with the rhythm of climate cycles, burying cities under sand or exposing them millennia later. The record is incomplete by nature, and within those gaps, possibilities accumulate like water in stone. Noon settles over the question now, bringing clarity to the terrain of uncertainty. Beyond the margins of the archaeological record, the mind begins to wander. And in that wandering, questions take shape that data alone cannot answer. Questions that hover in the space between what we know and what we can imagine. Perhaps the earth was dreaming when the first stones were stacked with intention. Perhaps in some earlier age, beneath skies we can no longer reconstruct, beneath stars arranged in configurations we'll never see again. Other hands shaped other stones, carved other symbols, asked other questions that sound remarkably like our own. The geological record shows periods of relative climate stability lasting tens of thousands of years. Windows of opportunity when agriculture could flourish, when populations could grow, when the surplus of food and time might give birth to art, astronomy, architecture, philosophy. Some studies propose that global climate during the last interglacial period roughly 130,000 to 115,000 years ago, was actually warmer than today. Sea levels were higher by perhaps 20 feet. Forests covered regions now barren. Hippos lived in what is now the Thames River. Anatomically modern humans already existed in Africa during this time. Their cognitive capabilities identical to ours, their brains the same size, their capacity for language and abstract thought fully developed. What if small groups migrated beyond Africa during this period, adapted to new environments, organized into communities? What if they built on coastlines now drowned, in river valleys now buried under hundreds of feet of sediment, leaving traces too faint for our instruments to detect? The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis suggests that a cosmic impact, or airburst, around 12,800 years ago, triggered sudden cooling and widespread fires across multiple continents. While the hypothesis remains debated within scientific circles, evidence of a thin layer of carbon-rich sediment, magnetic spherules, and platinum anomalies appears at dozens of sites worldwide, spanning from North America to Europe to the Middle East. If such an event occurred, if a comet fragment exploded in the atmosphere or struck the ice sheets covering North America, it would have devastated large regions, potentially destroying evidence of whatever societies existed at the time. Civilizations, if they were there, would have been buried under ash and mud, their achievements scattered into fragments too small to recognize, too ambiguous to prove. And beyond what the data can show, beyond the limits of carbon dating and stratigraphy, there exists the realm of imaginative possibility. Not fantasy, not wishful thinking, but the acknowledgement that the universe is stranger and older than our instruments can fully map. Deep time offers space for recursion, for patterns that repeat at scales so vast they become invisible to those living within them. Perhaps every civilization believes itself to be the first and only. Perhaps the urge to build, to record, to reach toward understanding is not unique to this moment, but woven into consciousness itself, an impulse that arises whenever matter organizes into minds capable of wonder. And if that impulse is fundamental, if it appears wherever conditions allow, then the statistical probability of repetition grows. Given enough time, given enough cycles of climate stability, similar patterns might emerge again and again. Geological cycles operate on scales that make human history feel like a single breath. The Milankovitch cycles, variations in Earth's orbit and axial tilt, drive ice ages on roughly 100,000-year intervals. Within those cycles, shorter oscillations create periods of warmth and cold, plenty and scarcity. Over millions of years, these cycles repeat, creating similar conditions again and again, similar temperatures, similar sea levels, similar distributions of arable land, similar opportunities for complex societies to emerge. If the stage is set identically, might the same play unfold more than once? Research into cultural evolution shows that human societies, when isolated, often develop similar technologies independently. Agriculture emerged separately in at least 7 regions worldwide: the Fertile Crescent, China, Mesoamerica, the Andes, Sub-Saharan Africa, New Guinea, and Eastern North America. Pottery, metalworking, writing, urban planning, all invented multiple times by groups with no contact. This suggests that, given certain conditions, certain innovations become almost inevitable, not because of mystical forces, but because human cognition, faced with similar challenges and opportunities, tends toward similar solutions. The wheel, the lever, the arch, these are not unique inspirations, but logical responses to universal problems. Extend this principle across deep time. If anatomically modern humans existed for hundreds of thousands of years, experiencing dozens of climate cycles, might they have independently developed complex societies multiple times? Each time, building on coastlines during periods of low sea levels. Each time, developing agriculture when the climate stabilized. Each time, wiped away by rising seas or climate shifts or cosmic impacts. Each time, forgotten. The fossil record of civilizations is biased toward stone. Metal corrodes within millennia. Organic materials vanish within centuries. Even concrete, our modern miracle, crumbles within centuries when exposed to weather and freeze-thaw cycles. After 10,000 years, almost nothing remains, except the most durable monuments and those lucky enough to be buried under sediment that preserves rather than destroys. A civilization that built primarily with wood, that used organic materials for clothing and tools, that lived on coastlines now submerged. Such a civilization could exist and vanish almost without trace. Consider the Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a shipwreck off the coast of Greece. This ancient analog computer, dated to around 100 BCE, was so sophisticated that nothing comparable appeared again for over 1,000 years. If the shipwreck had not preserved it, if it had rusted away on land, we would have no evidence that ancient Greeks possessed such advanced astronomical knowledge or mechanical skill. How many other artifacts, how many other achievements have been lost completely? Some archaeologists have noted anomalies that whisper of complexity we don't fully understand. Stone tools that appear too sophisticated for their assigned dates. Megaliths moved with techniques we still debate. Stones weighing hundreds of tons, transported for miles, and fitted together with such precision that a knife blade cannot fit between them. Astronomical alignments in structures built by people who supposedly lacked writing or mathematics. The Antikythera mechanism is not alone in challenging our assumptions. These anomalies do not prove lost civilizations, but they complicate the narrative, introducing uncertainty into what once seemed certain. Myths from cultures worldwide speak of great floods, of ages that ended in water or fire, of previous worlds inhabited by giants or gods or peoples whose knowledge was lost. The Sumerians wrote of kings who ruled before the flood. The Greeks spoke of ages of gold, silver, bronze, and iron, each destroyed before the next began. Hindu texts describe vast cycles of creation and destruction spanning millions of years. Australian Aboriginal stories preserve memories of coastlines now underwater. Most scholars interpret these as metaphorical or exaggerated memories of local disasters. But mythology, like geology, preserves layers of time. Stories pass from generation to generation, changing slightly with each telling, but retaining a core of remembered truth. Perhaps embedded in these myths are distant memories of real events, catastrophes that destroyed sophisticated societies, leaving only stories to mark their passing. It may be more honest to imagine this, that we walk through a world haunted by echoes of itself, that beneath the known past lies an unknown past, and beneath that, another, each separated by catastrophe and forgetting, each leaving fainter traces. Not parallel worlds, but serial worlds, linked by the thread of recurring consciousness, recurring curiosity, recurring questions. The Earth keeps no perfect record, but it keeps some record. And in the gaps, in the silences between what we know, possibility breathes. The possibility that intelligence is not singular, but recurrent. That awareness blooms, fades, blooms again across the ages. That we might be walking paths walked before, asking questions asked before, building on the ruins of attempts that came before, even if those ruins have dissolved into the stone itself. Time stretches, the light holds steady, but shadows begin their slow gathering at the edges. Stone remembers pressure. Water remembers salt. DNA remembers ancestors so distant they lived when the planet's day was 23 hours long instead of 24, when the moon hung larger in the sky, when the continents were arranged in configurations we can barely reconstruct. Memory is not exclusive to minds. It dwells in matter itself, in patterns that persist, in information encoded at scales we're only beginning to read. When the planet folds its crust back into its mantle, when subduction zones consume entire tectonic plates over millions of years, what memories dissolve into magma? What histories melt back into the forge? If civilizations rose and fell in the spaces between ice ages, their ruins now rest beneath ocean floors, sediment layers, and time's slow erasure. The people who built them would have been us, not mythical or alien, but human in every sense, driven by the same desires to understand, to create, to persist. They would have looked at the same stars, though arranged slightly differently due to the precession of Earth's axis. They would have wondered at the same mysteries, why the sun rises, where the rain comes, from what dreams mean. They would have felt the same pull toward permanence in a world defined by change. Perhaps they succeeded for centuries or millennia. Perhaps they mapped the heavens, noting the movements of planets with the same care we do. Perhaps they composed music, loved fiercely, argued about meaning and purpose and the nature of existence. Perhaps they discovered mathematics independently, noting the same patterns we note: the golden ratio, the Fibonacci sequence, the relationship between circles and their diameters. Perhaps they developed agriculture, domesticated animals, built cities along rivers that no longer exist. Perhaps they believed themselves eternal, as every civilization does. Then the ice returned, or the seas rose, or the climate shifted beyond adaptation, and their cities became cliffs, their roads became riverbeds, their names became silence. When stone forgets its shape, does it still remember heat? When sand was once a temple wall, does it dream of the hands that placed each block with care and ceremony? The question itself is a kind of memory, consciousness reaching backward, trying to touch what came before, trying to feel the presence of absence. We are not separate from this process. We are inside it, both subject and object, both the question and the faint echo of an answer written in strata we haven't excavated yet. Every city we build stands on older foundations. Every foundation rests on sediment that was once something else: forests, reefs, shorelines, the debris of previous ages compressed into stability by the weight of time. The cycle breathes, rise and fall, complexity and collapse, innovation and forgetting. Not punishment or failure, but pattern. The pattern of entropy and emergence, of order briefly assembled before dispersing. Civilizations, like storms, form when conditions align. They organize energy, create structure, leave traces. Then they dissipate, returning their elements to the larger system, which churns toward the next configuration. In the deepest ice cores drilled from Antarctica and Greenland, scientists read climate history going back 800,000 years. Each layer of ice preserves ancient atmosphere, tiny bubbles of air from ages when humans did not yet exist, when our ancestors were still emerging from earlier forms, when the world was populated by species that would never write their own histories. The record shows cycles clear as heartbeat: warm periods, warm again, cold again, regular, predictable, inevitable. We live in a warm period now, a brief reprieve between ice ages. It has lasted roughly 12,000 years, long enough for agriculture to develop, for cities to rise, for writing to emerge and spread, for all of recorded history to unfold. Previous interglacials averaged 10 to 15,000 years. By that measure, ours might be nearing its end, or it might have millennia remaining. The planet does not announce its intentions. It simply continues, indifferent to our presence, our progress, our need for certainty. If this interglacial follows the pattern of previous ones, it will end. Ice will return. Glaciers will advance from the poles and mountains, covering what we now consider temperate zones. Coastlines will extend as seas retreat, exposing land we've never seen. And the landscapes we inhabit now, cities, farms, monuments, will be scoured or buried, hidden beneath ice and time. What traces will remain? What will the next interglacial's inhabitants find? Will they wonder if others came before? Will they feel the same unease we feel? The same suspicion that time is not a line, but a spiral, not progress, but recurrence? Perhaps consciousness itself is the recursion. Perhaps awareness arises whenever matter achieves sufficient complexity, and once arisen, it always asks the same questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? What happens when we're gone? Have we been here before? These questions might be signatures of consciousness, inevitable byproducts of minds capable of reflection, not unique to humanity, not unique to this moment, but universal, recurring wherever minds emerge from matter and begin to wonder about their place in the vastness. If that is true, then every civilization is both original and echo, both first and thousandth, both discoverer and rediscoverer of truths that lie dormant in the structure of reality itself, waiting to be found again by whatever minds emerge. And the finding itself, the moment of recognition, carries within it the ghost of all previous recognitions, even if we cannot remember them, even if the evidence has been erased by time and tide. Dusk settles over the ledger of stone now. The light softens. Shadows lengthen across ancient surfaces, painting the landscape in amber and gray. Evening arrives not as ending, but as transition, the slow dimming that invites rest. We have traveled from stone to speculation, from fact to feeling, from the planet's deep memory to our own quiet wondering. And now the journey turns toward silence, toward the place where questions rest without needing answers, where curiosity dissolves into acceptance. We return to the beginning, but softer now. The earth still breathes beneath its burden of civilizations, past and present, and yet to come. Continents still drift at the pace of fingernail growth, though we cannot feel them move. Oceans still rise and fall with the slow pulse of climate cycles measured in millennia. And somewhere in the sediment, in the folded strata and compressed layers of time, our moment is being recorded, not as triumph or tragedy, but as another thin line in an archive too vast to read completely. Perhaps we have lived this before, in forms we cannot quite remember. Perhaps the monuments we build and the questions we ask are echoes of monuments and questions from ages drowned beneath the sea. Or perhaps we are truly first, stumbling into consciousness, for the first time on this particular world, at this particular moment, originals in a universe of originals, unique and unrepeatable. Either way, the questions remain, and the questions themselves are beautiful, are enough, are the mark of minds that can look at time and not turn away. They are proof that consciousness cares about its origins, about its place in the vast progression of ages, about meaning and connection and continuity across scales we can barely comprehend. The stars that guided ancient navigators still guide us, though they've moved slightly in the millennia since those first sailors learned to read them. The stone that held the first carved symbol still exists somewhere, buried or worn smooth, but not erased. Its atoms redistributed, but not destroyed. Information persists in ways we're still learning to read. Patterns recur at every scale. And consciousness, however briefly it flickers, illuminates the darkness, asking its eternal questions into the patient silence of stone and stars. We cannot know if we have been here before. The evidence is incomplete, scattered, drowned beneath ages of change. But we can know this, that the earth remembers in its way, that time is vast enough to hold mysteries we will never solve. That absence does not mean emptiness, and silence does not mean nothing. As the centuries drifted, so we drift now toward sleep and stillness. The documentary fades like evening light on water, leaving only the impression of vastness, of depth, of questions that have no answers and need none. The night comes gently, as it always has, as it always will, bringing with it the ancient comfort of darkness and rest. The planet keeps turning. Stone keeps time. Oceans keep their slow rhythm. The cycle continues. Everything waits, and the earth keeps breathing. So do we.